or adult women. And we're going to sing my favorite song, and I think the first hymn I ever learned. So, this is my Father's world. To make it even more nervous, one of these women got engaged last week. Yes, I'm making an honest woman out of me finally. You know, we're so excited for Casey. So. All right, let's do this.
This is my Father's love, and to my listening ears, all nature sings and loudly rings the music of the saints. This is my Father's world. I rest me in the calm of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, and the wonders of this is my Father's world. The birds their carols raise, from morning like the lily white, where their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world. He shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass I hear him pass, speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world. Oh, let me never forget that though the wrong seems off so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world. Why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King, let the heavens ring, winds let the earth be glad.
Oh, thank you guys. It is his world. He's in charge. Who's in charge? God, thank you. Yes, he is. And he gave us this book that we can freely read. So let's turn to Exodus. Well, if you want, that's not it. It's Exodus 20. Yeah. Exodus 20, and we're going to read verses 4 through 6. Exodus 20. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them nor serve them. For I am the Lord your God. I'm a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. Praise God for his word, and may he bless the reader. Thank you.
I'm glad to take that off. For the kids present, and maybe some of the adults, this topic this morning, you may find it a little boring. I don't know. Kids have a hard time with sermons anyway, let's face it. So I have a worksheet here for the kids, and I'm going to ask Jay if you'll come and hand these out to whoever wants one. You don't have to be a kid to want one. It's just a little worksheet, something to keep yourself occupied, and your mind may be thinking a little bit about the topic this morning. So you can just raise your hand if you want one of those. Oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you, Kevin. Kevin always gets things set up for me, and if it was up to me, I wouldn't do PowerPoint. But I do PowerPoint because it's my way to try to keep myself on track, because I have a way of wanting to wander off into a lot of other things when I'm talking here. So, one love this morning. We're going to talk about the jealous God. When the pastor asked me to talk about this, I thought, oh, this is a difficult subject. The jealous God of the second commandment, right? So I want to start with, a few years ago, Oprah Winfrey was giving an interview. And in this interview, she was explaining why she rejects organized religion, or her distrust of organized religion with all its rules and tenets that go along with it. And here's what she said. She was sitting in a church on a Sunday, and the preacher was talking about the Lord thy God is a jealous God, and the Lord thy God will, and these are her words, will punish us for whatever, she says. And that she's sitting there and she's thinking, wait a minute, she was in her 20s, and this is an all-powerful, all-knowing God, and he's jealous of me? That doesn't make any sense. And so that ended the subject for her, I guess. I think she still holds that viewpoint to this day. Now the problem, there's several problems with this, and one is that when we just take a whatever reading of the Bible, you know, that casual look at it, the skimming through it, we can come up with we can see some strange things about God there, and we come to some strange conclusions, don't we? So one of the problems, and that's one of the problems Oprah has, her intellectual curiosity didn't kick in to say, well, maybe I should dig a little deeper. Maybe I should look into this. Maybe there must be something more to it. It's in the Bible. And the Bible is a very complex book. It's 66 books in one, and somehow we have to dig through them and see how they harmonize, right? The other problem is the definition of the word jealous. Okay, there's this scripture reading. We heard it, so I'm going to skip past that slide. That's just a reminder for me. The first definition of the word jealous is this feeling of envy of someone else because of their accomplishments, who they are, what they have, their advantages over you. And this is probably where Oprah's coming from, because she's been the receiving end of this sort of jealousy, right? Being the richest woman in America. So she knows how ugly this kind of jealousy is. And this does not describe God. The second one is a feeling or showing suspicion of someone's unfaithfulness in a relationship. This might be a little bit closer, because when we think about our relationship with God, we are the unfaithful party in that relationship, are we not? God is the faithful one, we are the unfaithful. But the problem with this is suspicion. God does not have to be suspicious. He knows our every thought. And he doesn't have to lurk around in dark alleys waiting to see if we're going to come out of a place we shouldn't be with somebody we shouldn't be with, right? He knows where we are. He knows what we're doing. So this doesn't quite fit what we're talking about. Deuteronomy, I think it's in chapter 9 or 10, where it said that the text about the earth is the Lord and everything in it's the Lord's, you know, so he's not envious of us for anything, right? There's multiple texts in the Bible where he talks about it. There's one in the book of Judges, chapter 10, where he says, I know your unfaithfulness. I know where you've been. I know you've gone after other gods. So these two definitions don't work for us, but we're going to do this third one here, and this comes closest to our understanding of a jealous God, one who is fiercely protective or vigilant of one's rights or possessions. So we can understand that, and for you kids in the audience, you understand this definition of jealousy, don't you? Because in your world, think about it, you've probably gone through this where there's something you really wanted, and you've been waiting and waiting and waiting for it. Maybe you've had to save up your money to get it, or it's an event coming up, you've had to wait and wait for this to happen. But when you finally get this thing that you've been wanting so badly, and you have it, you're so excited, right? It's there on your dresser in your room, and then somebody like maybe your mom, let's say, or your sister comes in the room and says something like, that's really cool, I've always wanted one of those. Can I have it? And she picks it up and starts walking out of the room with it. What's your reaction? What do you say?
No.
No, because why?
It's mine.
That's mine. That's right. That's the kind of jealousy we're talking about. Now, so how does this work out in our lives? So how do we see a jealous God at work in our life? And there's tons of Bible stories that illustrate who God is to us. And today I want to use the story of Ruth. Ruth is a complex book. There's a lot, not just written in the book of Ruth, but there's a lot of commentary about the book of Ruth. There's ancient Hebrew literature from the oral traditions that fill in a lot of details on the story of Ruth. There's themes about completion, redemption, restoration, and there's many other lessons to be learned from the book of Ruth. But let's see if we can find how God works in our lives, the jealous God in our lives through the story of Ruth. So, this book of Ruth takes place in the time of the Judges, right? And then it's towards the end of the Judges. The Israelites have been in the land of Israel for many generations. They've really settled in now. And God, from the beginning, tells them they're going to be different than the nations around them, right? For instance, they don't have a king like the other nations do. Who is their king? God is their king. And so to oversee their civil government, their civil affairs, they have a series of judges who rule over them. But like humans, when it comes to politics, humans are really good at one thing with politics, and that's corruption. Right? And so this system had become corrupted, and by the time, if you look at go to the book of Judges, the very last chapter, the very last verse in the book of Judges, it says there that every man did what was right in his own eyes. Meaning the civil system had broken down, there was social disorder, and people kind of were taking the law into their own hands. It was a state of anarchy, really. You turn the page over to the book of Ruth now, and excuse me, the book of Ruth starts out with this statement, that a famine has come upon the land. So on top of all the social unrest going on, they have a big famine now. And so that a man from Bethlehem, it says, takes his wife and his 2 sons, and he leaves his home in Bethlehem, and he moves to the country of Moab for the duration of this famine. The author of the book of Ruth doesn't give us much more information about this man, which is interesting because it is this man, the story starts with this man, and the story ends with this man, his name being restored. But they give us one other little clue. You know, it's like the writers of the Bible are always saying, well, there's more information there, you just have to go dig for it. You know, you got to study for it, you got to find it. So he gives us this other clue, and the man's name is, what? Elimelech. Now, that I think is significant because the name Elimelech means God is my king. So, we have a story of a man who leaves the country where God is supposed to be the king. A man whose name means God is my king, leaves the country where God is supposed to be the king, and he goes to a land where God definitely is not the king, right? Because what do we know about Moab? Moab is a country, they have a kinship with Israel, do they not? Do you know how they're related to Israel? They're related through Lot, right? So we know this from Genesis 19, because, okay, now I'm going off a little bit here because this is of interest to me anyway. In Genesis 19, we have a story of 2 other women, because in our story today with Ruth, there's going to be 2 women, right? Some people believe that Oprah and Orpha and Ruth were sisters, but anyway, in Genesis 19, we have 2 sisters, 2 women. They're in a similar situation that Ruth and Orpha are going to find themselves in. They have no husbands. They have no hope for a husband. And it's right after they've been rescued from Sodom, right? Before Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. And so these 2 sisters come up with an ingenious plan as to how to save their father's name, because it's going to die with him now. There's nobody else to carry on the father's name. So they come up with this great plan. Well, we'll each have a son by our father, and that will save his name. So the older daughter has a son named Moab, and the younger sister has a son, Ammon. So these two sisters, let's see, I don't have it there. But you can see in the map there's the kingdom of Moab, and right above it's the kingdom of Ammon. And these are Lot's descendants. Now, the reason I mention all this is because in our text this morning, it talks about God punishing to the third and fourth generation. The father's wickedness goes all the way down to the third and fourth generation. Okay, well, we can read between the lines and assume that Lot would have told his two sons about the God of heaven, the God of Abraham, because God has just saved his life, right? So you would think he's instilling in these two boys about the God of heaven, and that they would then tell their sons and their sons. But the ancient Hebrew rabbis who comment on these things tell us, back in Deuteronomy, when God tells his people, be diligent about teaching this to your children and your children's children, because if you aren't diligent, what happens to it? It gets watered down. And so the ancient rabbis are saying, if you don't make sure that you're telling them everything God has told you, with each generation it gets less. The third and the fourth generation still have maybe some of the truth. They understand that what their father's choices are to go after the gods. They understand that this is wrong. They have enough understanding that there's another God to serve, but they still go along, they follow in their father's footsteps. But the rabbis told us, but by the time you get down to the fifth generation and beyond, it's gone. They don't know about God of Abraham. They don't know about God and his laws. They don't serve that God. And this happened in Moab. So the people of Moab have a different society altogether than Israel. They're a prosperous society, and they're a pleasure-seeking society. And they serve other gods, not the God of Abraham. So in our story of Ruth, what happens, as you know the story, Elimelech dies in Moab. His two sons marry Moabite women. And 10 years later, we're told, the sons die as well. And now we have 3 widows on our hands here. And these 3 widows, for Naomi, Elimelech's widow, there's nothing left for her in Moab. It's a place of death for her. Her husband's died, her sons have died, and she has no chance that she's going to have any other sons to take care of her now. So she decides, well, at least I'll go back to my own country. The famine's over there, I'll return there. And the 2 daughter-in-laws, this is a testament to the person that Naomi was. The 2 daughter-in-laws want to go with her. They don't want to stay in their own country. They want to be wherever Naomi goes, that's where they want to go. And so they start on this journey with Naomi. Now, they get to a certain point in the journey, and Naomi tells the 2 girls, it's time for you to go, you need to go back to your own country. You better not come with me. Now again, the author doesn't give us all this dialogue that had to have taken place, but somewhere in the 10 years, or perhaps as they're starting this journey, Naomi would have been explaining to them how life is going to be different in Judah than it was in Moab. And she's telling them things like, you have a life of ease and comfort here. I don't know if I'm going to have a roof over my head when we get there. You're used to entertainments and things. Going to the theater was a big deal in Moab. And that's not allowed in Israel, in Judah. But you won't have that kind of thing. The food will be different. You may have to dress different. And the people may never accept you. You're a foreigner, you're a Gentile. They may always view you that way. You may never fit in with them. And to top all that off, the God of Judah is a different God, and we worship him different. It's totally different than what you're used to. So here they are in the middle of the road, so to speak, with a decision to be made. And, the Bible tells us that there was much weeping, and they're clinging, and they're hugging, and now, I'm sorry, gentlemen, but this is a story about 3 women, right? Because I know if this were three of you guys and you're in the middle of the road there deciding, it wouldn't be quite so emotional, would it? I mean, there might be a hug and a pat on the, slap on the back and well, we'll see you around, have a good trip, and you'd say, well, do you need a map? And you'd go like, well, no, I got it, I'm ready to go, and you'd be on your way. Right? So you have to forgive us because this is women, this is what we do. This is how we are. I think my kids only listen to my sermons so they get to that point where I start getting emotional so they can give me a hard time about it afterwards. But at least it gets them to listen to that point. So the women are having a struggle with, do I go forward or do I go back? And Orpha decides, maybe that unknown step to go forward is a bit too much. Maybe it's better if I go back to what I know rather than this unknown future. And she makes a decision and she turns, it seems like reluctantly, but she does make a decision, I'm going back to Moab. But Ruth has a totally different reaction. Ruth is like Naomi, she says to her, don't make me go back there. There's nothing for me there. It's a place of death for me as it was for you, Naomi. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be part of that culture. I want the God that's your God. Right? That famous speech she gives. I don't care if we don't have a roof overhead, wherever you lodge, that's where I'm going to be. We are people, whether they accept me or not, I'm going to accept them. They'll be my people. And I want your God. I don't want that God, those gods back there. And then she swears that oath that you see throughout the Old Testament a lot. May God do to me, and even more so if I don't, if I'm not telling the truth, right, basically is what she's saying. So Naomi says, okay. She means it, she's sincere, and then she goes with her. Now, in the Jewish tradition, this story of Ruth, this is an illustration of completion. And it gets a little complicated here, but as they go back to Israel, to Judah, it's the time of the harvest, right? And this harvest time ends with Pentecost, the celebration of first fruits. And the Jewish interpretation here would be, well, Ruth is representative of the children, of those people who left Egypt. They're leaving that old life. They're turning away from the old life. That time of sadness and sorrow, of having to uproot yourself. We're leaving this place that's celebrated by the Passover. 50 days later, there comes Pentecost, which is a time of rejoicing. So they see Ruth's decision to leave that country of death to her and accepting the God of Abraham as a circle of completion, the time from Passover to Pentecost. And so I can't read my printing, I don't have my glasses, so I don't know what it says on the screen there. Let's see. That's what I said. And it's completion too because a descendant of Lot has returned to the God of Abraham. All right. So we know the story. She goes with her. It's harvest time. Ruth, because they're poor, she goes into the fields. Oh, this is the old slide. I'm sorry. I have two sets of slides for this, and this is the first one. The second one has more words there. But anyway, she works in the fields. She ends up in Boaz's fields, and she spends the entire harvest time working in Boaz's fields. And Boaz, when he recognizes and finds out who she is, he recognizes they have a kinship, right? And I see his relationship to her. He takes a fatherly interest in her. We know that he's quite a bit older than her. In Hebrew tradition, they say he was twice her age. And they say that she was 40, so anyway, we don't know that for a fact, though, do we? But anyway, we do know that he's older than her. And he calls her daughter. Several times in the passage, you'll see he refers to her as daughter. So he has this protective instinct. And when Ruth asks him, why are you being so nice to me? And all this extra, the extra gleanings. And he tells his workers, guys, now listen, I know she's a widow, I know she's a foreigner, but lay off. She's not fair game. She's under my protection. She asks, why are you doing this for me? And he says, it's because you're family. It's my job to take care of you, he says to her. Well, as the story continues, we get to the end of the harvest, the time of celebration. And Naomi is now concerned about Ruth's future. I need to secure a future for Ruth, she says. And so she says that the law in Judah, and we had this in Sabbath school this morning, about the kinsman redeemer. If a man dies and has no children, his next in line, whether it's a brother or whatever relative's next in line, is supposed to take that woman and see that she has children, carry on the name of her deceased husband. And so Ruth makes this bold move, and she goes to Boaz and she says, I want you to redeem me. I want you to be my kinsman redeemer. And he agrees to do it, doesn't he? But he agrees, but he says, I'm going to do it. But he says, but there's somebody who has a claim already. Somebody with a prior claim on you, a closer kinsman than me. And the law requires that I have to go to him and make sure that if he doesn't do it, then I'll do it. But he has first responsibility. Right. Thank you. So that's what he does. The next day he goes, he finds his kinsman, and they have this meeting in this public place. And he kind of sets it up, I think, the way he wants the answer to come out. Because he says, you know, Elimelech's widow is back, and you're the closest kinman to her, and you can buy back her lands for her husband's name, And so the man says, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, sure, I'll buy back those lands. And then Boaz says, well, and also, you know, you have to take Ruth as a wife. And then the kinsman says, well, wait a minute, no, I'm not going to do that. If I do that, it screws up my name and my inheritance, because any kids I have with Ruth, they're going to be known as Elimelech's. What happens to my family? What happens to my kids? What happens to my inheritance? Those lands will go to that child. So no, I don't think I want to do this, he says. He says, you do it to Boaz. And Boaz says, okay. And so their way of sealing a deal in front of the witnesses, the man takes off his sandal and he hands it to Boaz. And it's a way of saying, when my kids were little, I used to always tell them, when you hear a siren, you see an ambulance go by or a fire truck, whatever, that means somebody's in trouble. Say a prayer for him. When Leon was real little, the first time I said that to her, she was probably 2 years old, and I said, somebody's in trouble, and she goes, somebody naughty, she said. You know how much she was in trouble. Anyway, he hands his sandal to Boaz, and it's a way of saying, in front of all these witnesses, I acknowledge that you have the greater authority now. You have authority that supersedes me. And so Boaz redeems. He pays the price to buy the lands back, and he marries Ruth. But there's one more component to this legal matter, and this is the redemption part, but there's this restoration of the name part. And Obed is the only son that Boaz and Ruth have. And he's the one who inherits Elimelech's lands. And he's the one that, through Obed, the name of Elimelech, that relationship gets restored. Right? So now, and then we come to the end of the story. And I know what you're saying. Because this is what I thought. Okay, we got this far in the story, but I can see that Boaz is like God the Redeemer, who pays the purchase price to have us back, and how Obed, his son, is the one who restores our relationship with him. But you said there was going to be a jealous God, Auntie Debbie, and they're going to show us how he works in our lives. I don't see jealous God at work. Do you see jealous God at work in the story of Ruth? No, it's just, you're puzzled, aren't you? And that's why I look at it too. Why do you want me to use the story of Ruth for this? Well, you know, like I've said all along, the author's always saying, you know, you got to look a little bit deeper. You got to, sometimes you have to dig for it. And, you know, if this were a theater production, like those people in Moab liked, but if it were a theater production, there would be things going on behind the scenes that affect how we see what's happening on the stage, right? And we know that's true because remember Jesus talking to Nicodemus in describing the Holy Spirit. He says, well, it's like the wind. You can't see it at work, but you know because you see its effect. And the same thing is true here about the jealous God. We don't see him, but maybe we can understand it this way, because you and I both know that there is a cosmic battle that goes on in this universe, right? And it started with Lucifer rebelling in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought against Lucifer and his angels, right? And it's still going on today. But we don't see it in the sense that we see actual fighting going on, do we? We see the effects of it working out in our life. Amen. Yes, we do. Thank you. But we don't see it, so we're going to, take a peek back behind the stage, behind the curtain, or under the surface, however you want to word it. Because what's happening when Ruth says to Naomi, don't make me go back to that land of death? What's happening on the cosmic level when she makes that appeal, that cry out to Naomi, like, I want your God? And so we have to go to Ruth's great-grandson, who is, go down 4 generations, we come to King David, right? And so if we go in our Bibles to, we're looking for the jealous God. Jealous God, it implies that there's going to be some fireworks, right? There's a lot more emotion, there's a lot of drama. There's got to be some anger when we talk about a jealous God. So we're going to go to Psalm chapter 18. Because David describes this. So when Ruth is crying out to Naomi and saying, don't make me go back to that land of death. In Psalm 18, I think it's verse 2? Verse 4. Yes, where she's saying, David describes it this way, if I go back there, the pangs of death surround me and the floods of ungodliness make me afraid. I don't want to be there. I don't want to be back there. I'm afraid if I go back there, what's going to happen to me? And this is what God is hearing her say. And when she says to Boaz, I want you to be the one who redeems me, David describes it this way in Psalm 18, verse, 6? What I put up there?
4.
6. Moving down to 6. In my distress I called upon the Lord, and I cried out to my God, and he heard my voice from his temple, and my cry came before him, even to his ears. This is what's happening on the cosmic scene as Ruth is saying, I want you to redeem me. I want to belong to you, not anyone else. And so if you read further in this chapter, you're going to see God's response here, because this is dramatic. God says he comes thundering out of heaven with lightning flashing, and as he comes, it says he comes swooping down on the wings of the wind, and he's gathering dark clouds as he goes, and it talks about hailstones and brimstone and fire. There's fire coming from his mouth, and there's smoke coming from his nostrils, and he's angry. Why is he angry? He's coming down, it says, and then what does he do? He's coming down into the very depths of hell itself. It's a description of hell, isn't it? There's fire, there's brimstone, there's thundering, there's lightning. The earth trembles, the mountains shake, it says. And verse 16, he comes and he grabs Ruth out. And what does he say? Well, in essence, he's saying, she's mine. You can't have her. She's mine. That's what he's saying to death. She's mine. To the enemy. She's mine. And why does God go to this trouble? This insignificant woman, Ruth, she has no value to anybody. She hasn't even done what her society expects of her. The one value a woman has, and that's produce children. But he does it for her. He delighted in it. Because, you got it. Somebody just read ahead. Verse 19. And it's what Pastor talked about last week. Because he delights in her. She's a delight to him. You're a delight to him. To everybody who calls on his name, you're a delight to him. And we don't want to forget this part. Because in our text this morning, it talked about those who love me and keep my commandments. And he says, why are we his delight? Because we love him. Because we keep his commandments. His judgments, his statutes are always before me, David says. Now, is that dramatic enough for you? Is there fireworks there? Of course. You see, in the story of Orpah and Ruth really illustrate Moab and Judah, right? Moab gets its beginning at the time of Sodom, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's because of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah that Moab comes into being, right? And the last reference in the Bible to Moab is found in Zephaniah. And it's a prophecy that states, Moab and Ammon will end as Sodom and Gomorrah. You see, as we stand in the middle of the road there, like Ruth and Orpah, and we're faced with a decision, God is saying, you go forward or you go backward. And living in a society that's a prosperous society, we carve out this third space. We say, you've all heard this said. Well, I'm not so sure I believe in that whole business about God, but I'm not saying I don't believe it either. You know, that agnostic. I'm thinking about it. And God says, okay. But God says, but there's only two people. There's only two kinds of people. There's those who love me and accept me. There's those who reject me. And if you stand dithering in the road for too long about it, the decision's made for you. You have to consciously make a decision for me, or that decision is you're going to drift back. That's the way it really is. That's what's happening on the cosmic level. We can comfortably stand here and dither all we want, and I'm a great ditherer, as most of you know. I can dither about just about anything. But he says, you've got to make a choice. And he says, and the minute you say, okay, God, I choose you, I want you, he comes thundering out of heaven with fire and brimstone and the whole works for you. The minute you say that, and snatches you out from the enemy's hands. It's no coincidence that to this day, when the Jews celebrate Pentecost, the harvest of the first fruits, Pentecost, right? They're also celebrating, they celebrate the harvest, and they're celebrating the giving of the commandment, the law of God from Mount Sinai. That's their purpose. They're praising God for the giving of his law. They call it, what?
The Feast of Tabernacles.
No, it's the Feast of First Fruits, I believe, right? But Shavuot, they call it Shavuot, I believe. Mm-hmm. It's no coincidence, then, how important the Word of God, the law of God is. And that as they celebrate this occasion, the giving of the law and the harvest of the first fruits, they celebrate it by doing what? They read the book of Ruth.
It's the Redeemer book.
The Redeemer book. God works in mysterious ways. Even in a sweet story that little old ladies like me, a weak heart, say, okay, God, I can accept that story. It's not too much excitement going on there. But behind the scenes, God is working. God is the faithful one. God is one who has mercy. And if that's what your understanding of God as well, and I hope you will join me as we sing our closing hymn, which is Great is Thy Faithfulness, hymn number 100.
Father.
thank you so much for your faithfulness to us. And we ask that you give us the strength to go forward and maintain and be faithful in our side of the relationship with you. Be with us, Lord. May we be a blessing. And we thank you for these blessings in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.